Good afternoon, everybody, and good morning for whoever is coming from the US and other places. It's a real pleasure to welcome you to this important conversation on the intersection of artificial intelligence and neurotechnology, and how this transformative changes and transformative, in fact, forces are shaping the trajectory of our economies and societies. So they are coming together, and the integrated effect is huge for our future. So, in fact, we are witnessing a convergence of these two profound technological booms. First, the rapid advancement of artificial intelligence. There are new tools every day. There are new versions every day. There are new methods every day. And of course, this is also challenging our brain capacities to adapt, but also reshaping our industries and completely redefining our human potential and human capital overall. But also the breakthroughs in neurotechnology and neuroscience offering unprecedented insight into the human brain and its complexities. So these two forces together, they are allowing us to innovate further and really to revolutionize how we work, how we learn, how we innovate, and also how to deal with our health, and particularly with our brain health and our future skills to deal with those changes. But also, I think it's important that these forces are challenging us to rethink overall how we define our economies, our prosperity, resilience, healthcare, and technology, and also overall well-being in this century and in the years to come. So these converging forces will be shaped and will shape the brain economy. And I think our thinking about the brain economy, it's really fundamental into this construction. It's in fact a concept that is increasingly recognized as a cornerstone to achieve global flourishing, human flourishing, but at the same time to move our economies into where nobody has gone yet. And we would like to develop this journey, not only involving technology, neurotechnology, edutech, but also other new developments in terms of health. And the brain economy, with its emphasis, in fact, on brain health, cognitive skills, and brain positive innovation, provides a really interesting, comprehensive, compelling framework to harness this convergence. So it recognizes that brain capital, particularly the brain potential, is our most valuable resource in navigating these great challenges of our time. From, for example, digital transformation and transition, to the clean energy transition, to the geopolitics and the uncertainties behind geopolitics, but also to the current and upcoming mental health crisis, to the need also for inclusive and sustainable development. We need to really work together to achieve the inclusive and sustainable development, but also in terms of a knowledge-based economy and evidence-based economy, and this is essential. So our brain is our main asset, and we need to invest in it in terms of health, in terms of learning, in terms of skills, from the day we are born to the day we are aging, because this is really a brain that allows us to move and to navigate into this complex journey. So today's conversation will explore how AI and neurotechnology can amplify one another to foster a brain positive economy, one that prioritizes really mental well-being, cognitive equity, and inclusive access to the opportunities, the challenges this technology, creates. And we are extremely honored to have with us very distinguished speakers and experts in their field to give their experience, expertise, and insights on how to, in fact, help envision pathways to align technological innovation with the human flourishing. And let me say that this webinar is a pre-conference event of the Euro-Mediterranean and African Network for Economic Studies, promoted by the Euro-Mediterranean Economists Association and the Center for European Policy Studies for this year. And our conference this year is about navigating new frontiers, digitalization, labor market, and societal transformation in Europe, the Mediterranean, and Africa. So I'm very happy that this webinar is co-hosted by the Mediterranean Economists Association with the Neuropolicy at the Rice University Bakers Institute for Public Policy and Brain Capital Alliance and the Brain Economy Hub. So we've been working together now with many colleagues, and then we are trying really to shed some light on this interaction and understand how it will shape our thinking, also the brain economy globally. So let me start by introducing John Nagai. John, he is a neuroscientist and he is the director of the National Institutes of Health Brain Initiative. And I would like to hear from John on the brain initiatives at the intersection of neurotechnology and AI. So the floor is yours, John, and great to have you with us today.
Thank you so much, Professor Ayati. Thank you for the invitation to be here to give a perspective from the U.S. National Institutes of Health Brain Initiative on this exciting intersection between AI and neuroscience. So let's see. Can you see my slides?
Perfect.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's a really amazing opportunities here in this intersectional space. I think we will hear the term confluence made many times. So the mission of the NIH Brain Research through Advancing Innovative Neurotechnologies, the Brain Initiative, is to revolutionize our understanding of the human brain by accelerating the development and application of innovative technologies. So the human brain is arguably the most powerful computer known to humankind, and it's also the most energy efficient, roughly 15 to 20 watts of this incredibly flexible and adaptable machine. Our goal is to develop the tools to understand how this biological computer functions. Of course, I don't have time to go through the various projects that we've been working on, but we're now entering our second decade of supporting what I think is amazing innovation. And we've been fostering innovation across the neuroscience research ecosystem by supporting the development of new tools and resources for the neurosciences. Let's see, get things out of the way, at unprecedented scale. And these projects include, just as an example, creating whole mammalian brain cell atlases that define the thousands, literally thousands of cell types, as well as their properties. And this is based on the analysis of tens of millions. Ultimately, it's going to be hundreds of millions of cells in these sophisticated new single cell and spatial technologies. We're also developing technologies to stand up whole brain connectivity or connectomic maps that define the ground truth or the wiring diagram for how neural circuits function, and ultimately to provide the basis for neural computations. And just recently, a group known as the Flywire Consortium that we have funded in part has published the complete wiring diagram of an adult female fruit fly, Drosophila, comprising about 150 million 140,000 neurons, making hundreds of millions of connections. And it's really just given us an amazing insight into how these machines might work. And we're also developing technologies that allow us to record activity from thousands, if not millions, of neurons simultaneously. And because of their scale and complexity, many, if not most, of these projects rely upon and also drive the innovation in artificial intelligence technologies. So we stand at a pivotal moment where advances in both AI and neuroscience create unprecedented opportunities to understand intelligence, improve human health, and advance the brain economy. But there are limitations of current AI approaches, in particular, their energy demands. We read about how much energy is being consumed just to run these algorithms, as well as their reasoning capabilities. And all this points to the critical importance of brain-inspired solutions. Now, many of you might have heard the term bandied about called neuro AI. And so just the past few years, we've seen a meteoric rise in interest in this emerging field, but known as neuro-inspired or neuro AI, which has become what some might call the next new thing. And some of the big questions or the themes of neuro AI research include, again, this convergence of AI and neuroscience to find common shared principles to drive theory-driven discoveries as well as new paradigms for AI and brain-like learning devices. This is based, of course, on the hundreds of millions of years that our brains have taken to evolve. There's areas of neural networks and dynamics, neuromorphic computing. Again, the human brains in particular, are highly energy efficient, and if we can design new architectures around these principles, we could actually go a lot further in terms of saving our planet from the devastating effects of anthropogenic climate change, as well as control theory and robotics. So just to get us on the same page for later discussion, what is neuro AI? What is it and what is it not? So what it's not is applying conventional AI techniques and machine learning methods for understanding and analyzing large-scale neural data sets. But what it is this wide-ranging scientific set of opportunities to reciprocally resolve obstacles to theoretical progress in neuroscience and discover more efficient and brain-like paradigms of intelligent computing. So neuro AI represents a convergence, but also presents us with many new opportunities. For example, the confluence of neuroscience and AI in creating powerful reciprocal advances. Neuroscience are forming more efficient AI architectures, while AI tools in turn can accelerate understanding of brains. Large-scale investments like the Brain Initiative and the Human Brain Project have created a foundation for transformative neuro AI approaches from basic science all the way through neurotechnologies for health. And digital twins and neural foundation models offer new platforms for testing hypotheses and model-based forecasting of complex biological and artificial systems. But there are limitations we need to be aware of in all these models. There are fundamental challenges, for example, in hallucinations, dependence on large pre-training data sets. We're limited by the data we put in to train these models. Limited black box reasoning capabilities and energy-intensive computational requirements, which I mentioned before, as well as biases and other ethical considerations. So the models inherit biases of the training data. Similarly, generative models can produce harmful, offensive, skewed, or misleading output, and different users have different assumptions about how all these things work. So I think we have several ethical imperatives for AI and neuro AI research. The tools for both conventional AI as well as neuro AI models need to be interpretable to be useful, while minimizing biases in the underlying models and in how users understand the models and their output. And I cannot overemphasize the importance of having ground truth information. There are ethical applications in neuroscience and other scientific domains that will be impeded by black box AI models based on closed weights and proprietary architectures. We really need to understand what's going on under the hood. And robust metadata and data provenance are really desperately needed, including consents and conditions for use of AI training. And provenance really does keep people in the loop with downstream AI and data uses. So I'll just sum up with a few points for us to consider moving forward. The convergence of neuroscience and AI research promises to revolutionize health science and technology, and also to advance the brain economy. Strategic investments in interdisciplinary training and open resources will accelerate progress. And I really must stress that consideration of the ethical, legal, and societal impacts of neuro AI need to be baked in from the outset and not just considered as an afterthought. And advancing the brain economy will require not just technological advances, but an intentional path towards systems that align with human values and capabilities. And I'll just stop there and pass this on to the next speaker.
Thank you, John, for this illumination, in fact, on the AI and neurotech, and also specifically on the neuro AI. I think as you said, there are huge opportunities, and I believe that the opportunities brought by this brain initiative is essential for building the brain economy. And in fact, what we need is further investments to ensure this is happening, and happening also based on the constraints that you mentioned, the limitations and the ethical aspects that you referred to. And it would be interesting to learn a bit more about those in the course of the discussion. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Harris Ayer. Harris is also a neuroscientist. He's lead and the senior fellow at the neuropolicy at the Rice University Baker Institute for Public Policy. He's the executive director of the Brain Capital Alliance and the Brain Economy Hub, and a member of the advisory board of the Euro-Mediterranean Economists Association. With Harris, we've been working a lot on the brain economy, brain capital, and it has been a great journey now for the past almost 4 years, Harris, trying really to have a common understanding between neuroscience and economics and policy and finance. And I think we are getting somewhere. I mean, I hear that we are there building this transformative journey based on those, I would say, forces that we have talked about, which is the artificial intelligence and neurotechnology. So the floor is yours, Harris.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Rim. And I'm very delighted to be presenting here after John's very strong opening. And maybe to say from the outset, as you're alluding to, Rim, the brain economy model is emerging, and so I think we have an opportunity to bake in these responsible, anticipatory approaches to neurotechnology and AI within the brain economy framework. So that this session today is great in that regard, because the brain economy is gaining momentum and understanding and popularity and methodological rigor, but it's not fully baked. So we can continue to include arguably the two biggest revolutionary forces in neurotechnology and AI into it. I want to talk a little bit more in detail now with more context on the brain economy, and then perhaps propose somewhat of a light framework for responsible innovation in this area. So just to set the scene about the brain economy, we call also more technically the brain positive economic transformation. It's this recognition that the current model of the economy and society is brain unhealthy, or you could say brain negative. It's exemplified by a $2.2 trillion cost of mental and neurological conditions. That's conditions across the lifespan from autism to Alzheimer's, and that cost is rising at 5% a year. So there's a major cost to the global economy in terms of healthcare cost and lost productivity. And so that cannot sustain. We cannot continue to have a 5% increase every year. So we must have systems change, and therefore we must transform the economy to be brain positive or brain healthy. And that means looking at approaches to building brain capital in each sector, looking from early childhood education, women's issues, health, social, environment, digital, etc. What are the core, 3 to 6 shifts that we need to see to build brain capital in each sector? And then what are targets and indicators to track progress towards those targets? So that's what the brain economy is about. We have published it in a couple of contexts. Anyway, that's the framing, and perhaps that's the canvas upon which we can think through a responsible innovation framework for neurotechnology and AI. So brain capital, as I mentioned, just to describe that in more detail, it is brain health and brain skills come together in this new economic asset. So brain health incorporates mental health and neurological conditions, and then brain skills are skills which are critical to succeed and thrive in the modern economy. Things like analytical thinking, creativity, resilience. So we're looking to measure with brain capital, and this is what we've done with the Global Brain Capital Dashboard that EMEA has led on. We have a global advisory group, is to look to try to measure brain capital, what's happening now, and then how would we measure changes in the future. Interestingly, just to give an economic spin to this, McKinsey and Company and the World Economic Forum have started to engage with us in the brain economy work. They noted here in a recent report that improving brain health through universal access to evidence-based prevention, treatment, and support has the potential to recover 130 million years of higher quality life. So that means unlocking a $26 trillion economic opportunity. So this is perhaps the first economic modeling that we've seen on the brain economy, and we're very grateful to our colleagues at WEF and the McKinsey Health Institute for this. And of course, we're now continuing to refine the economic modeling about what could the brain economy mean. And so, of course, within this umbrella of this potential economic opportunity comes neurotechnology and AI together. Also want to, as we think about a responsible innovation frame for neurotechnology and AI, I want to propose the lifespan. We're very lucky, for example, to have a representative from a good friend and colleague from UNICEF here today. But so let's think about brain capital across the lifespan from actually, pre-birth, birth, all the way through to adulthood and later life. There are things which we can think about that can be positive influences on brain capital. And you can see here some of those in blue: good parenting skills, early positive parenting experiences, social engagement, healthy food, exercise. And then there are things in red that are perhaps negative for brain capital. You can also see here, like, chronic stress, excessive drug use, early childhood trauma. And so again, as we think about and frame up the session today, what role does neurotechnology have in improving the brain? And John and the Brain Initiative are well on the way to many of these breakthroughs in improving brain capital with neurotechnology. But what can it also do to harm? And I'll talk about some harms in a second. You think about social media, online sports gambling, for example. And then, of course, the role of AI in this as well. AI has many potential benefits to improve diagnostic systems, treatment systems, but AI also has the potential to mislead people, to optimize the addictive potential of digital technologies, and so on and so forth, and also spreading mis and disinformation. So the brain economy is the punchline of my talk, is that we must incentivize with economic principles and then drive with economics responsible neurotechnology and AI innovation. And so exactly what framework we have for responsible innovation will be good to discuss today during the session. So neurotechnology is broadly understood as any technology designed to improve and to repair the nervous system function, as well as to enable researchers and clinicians to visualize the brain. So that's the framing system for neurotechnology. And interestingly, from an economic perspective, Morgan Stanley, a bank, recently published a report suggesting that brain-computer interface technologies have a projected $400 billion total addressable market, and that's in the United States alone. They do expect that uptake to be slow over the next 20 years, given the regulatory and research process that brain-computer interface needs to go through, as well as, of course, many new scientific breakthroughs that are needed, many of which the Brain Initiative has funded. And they think the highest uptake in the marketplace will be for motor neuron disease, multiple sclerosis, and for severe stroke. So that $400 billion total addressable market, this is a big, serious, new, really industrial innovation sector that is going to emerge in the coming decades and is significantly going to impact our economy. But of course, if we think more broadly about brain-computer interfaces, and apologize, this is a bit grainy. If we think about neurotechnology more broadly, it's not just brain-computer interfaces. It is much more than that. It includes neuromodulation, from outside of the skull to inside of the skull. It includes advanced neuromonitoring and neurofeedback, different types of brain imaging technologies, and so on and so forth. So it is a much bigger market, neurotechnology, than just brain-computer interface. So this is, again, demonstrating this will be a big area. There's a lot of research activity. There's a lot of commercial activity, venture capital that is moving into this space. And we're seeing increasing breakthroughs, as well as just, the increasing use of these technologies for patients, but also, of course, in the education sector as well. We think about neuroscience-inspired education technologies. So a quick point to make about algorithm addictions. Of course, when we use a digital device, that's a form of neurotechnology that we're interacting with, and our digital devices are mixed with algorithms of social media. Let's just take that on the left. The US Surgeon General warned that social media is harmful to youth as smoking or alcohol and advocated for warning labels. So this is one interesting and alarming point that the Surgeon General made. And then sports betting is something that we just saw actually written up very prominently in The Economist magazine, profiling the rise of sports betting online in the United States, and of course recognizing that it's been a major issue in Europe for some time and in Australia. But interesting quote from a UCLA expert professor: it's really the use of AI that creates predatory scenarios where people are already vulnerable because of mental health issues or a gambling addiction could be manipulated or targeted without their knowledge. And so as the US opens up the market for online sports betting, we are going to see an increase. We're already seeing it in AI-related and gambling addiction-related issues. And that, of course, has a significant mental health fallout, which, of course, has a fallout on the economy. So this is really critical stuff. I want to make a couple mentions, and then I'll wrap up soon. Brain skills are critical. So algorithm intelligence is a very important brain skill that we need to understand better. How do we teach children and then also adults? What are algorithms? How do you build them? How do they influence you for the better? How can you make them your co-pilot? And how are they going to influence you negatively? And a wonderful algorithm literacy project website here for folks that are interested. It's really around brain skills in the age of neurotechnology and AI. And then some points of, well, this is a national security issue. AI is rapidly increasing mis and disinformation development and insertion into our digital environment, into our digital media diet. This is, of course, being used in cognitive warfare by foreign adversaries. And so we must recognize that cognitive warfare is a new type of warfare that NATO has noted. And so how are we going to try to manage that in the future for all of our societies? How are we going to teach our citizens to be more digitally literate, to discern real information from fake information, and how are we going to potentially regulate? And then, of course, dual use brain-computer interface is an important area when we think about developing neurotechnologies. Some countries are not using much ethical oversight as much as perhaps the United States is. So this is an interesting ethical and economic dilemma that we need to wrestle with. Cognitive liberty is obviously important as a paradigm, and it's written up in various types of ethical reports. The one here I present in the bottom right is from UNESCO, but cognitive liberty is now on people's shirts. They want freedom to control his or her own mental processes, cognition, and consciousness. That should be, one of the human rights that we have is cognitive liberty. And of course, we know that neurotechnology, the ability to read and write the brain, is potentially impairing our cognitive liberty in the future and constraining it. So how are we going to protect cognitive liberty? We would like to be able to think and reason for ourselves without any influence, either conscious or subconscious influence. So I'm gonna stop here because I'm running over time, but there is a nice new advisory, a high-level United Nations AI advisory group that is developing recommendations for AI responsible innovation. We should factor that into our conversation today. And again, mapping on what is the beneficial role of neurotechnology, how could it harm our brain capital, and then likewise with AI, how can we benefit from it and mitigate the downside? So thank you very much, and I look forward to hearing the next speaker.
Harris, fascinating, really. And you mentioned something so important when we work on economic policy and driving an economy to thrive, at least to develop and thrive, is the incentives. So you need to incentivize for a transformative journey. And I think one of the key issues of the brain economy is to ensure that it's humanistic, and this is very important too. So we are, in a way, humanizing transitions to ensure that not only this increases our quality of life, but also to enhance our flourishing as a species. No, so this is also important in the process. And you mentioned also something so important is, of course, in any innovation, there are opportunities and also challenges and limitations. So we need to ensure that we use the positive side of any technology to ensure that we are also maximizing the value for more prosperity, not for destruction and addiction and other effects. I would say what you used to call them before, the negative type of brain economy that we are currently living in overall. So you didn't talk about it. I know that you would like always to see the optimistic scenario, driving into the optimistic scenario, but currently our economies are in a way driving us or incentivizing us to have a kind of a destructive type of for our brain overall. So this is something that we need to revert. So this is also extremely important to have the right policies, the right actions, the right investment, the right people, the right academic research that will drive us to societies that are flourishing, not being distracted, and also quality of life that is enhanced. Thank you very much for this, and we can discuss further. So our next speaker is Behnam Azang. He is a director of the Neuroengineering Initiative at the Rice University. And then he will be giving us a practitioner perspective on the convergence of AI and neurotechnology. Behnam, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm trying to share my screen.
Yeah, you did. It's shared.
Oh, it's shared. Okay. Excellent. I had no idea. All right. I just wanted to take a few minutes to talk about a practitioner view of AI and neurotechnology. And I think my talk is basically both inspired and complementary to what John talked about earlier and what Harris talked about, and also what Amy is going to talk about after me. Okay. Basically, again, as a engineer, it's good to think about what AI is and what are some different aspects of AI. I think when you think about it, AI is all about, one of the biggest tools of AI is machine learning. And I think machine learning is basically a technology that's been emerging over the last probably 30 years or so, where you take data and you learn from data. And that is sort of combined with data processing, which is another term used for this very similar technology. And I think when you think about AI and machine learning and all that, you can think about what are some more traditional techniques that is used to understand data and understand what is inherently in the data. And one set of tools in that space is information theory. Basically, it's been a technology that's been around for probably 70, 80 years. And basically, it has an incredible overlap with a number of different traditional disciplines, including physics and many others. And I think now that figure that I have in the bottom should be expanded to include AI and machine learning and all that. And basically is a very clever way of quantifying information and also in a way effectively process the information. Basically, when you talk about our brain has, processes information incredibly efficiently, as John said. And the question is that, can we learn from that? Can we find a set of techniques that are inspired by our brain or inspired, but basically come up with the ways to effectively process information and learn? And at the same time, that whole area has a big overlap with a traditional area called signal processing. Basically, when you look at these signals on the bottom right, you recognize that these are very different signals that carry different information, and there could be recordings from our brain. And then the question is that how much information is in that signal and how can we squeeze that information out? And that is a practitioner view of our brain and what we can do with our brain and how can we develop neurotechnologies to get that information out of the brain. And then when you now focus on neurotechnology and basically how technology can help us basically understand how our brain works, you can think of it and classify it in two very different ways. One would be one set of problems that you're trying to understand is to diagnose, to see how the brain works. And in many, many neurological disorders, we really don't know why these disorders emerge. And we need a diagnostic set of tools, a set of diagnostic tools, try to understand what these brain regions are doing and what and when they are diseased, what they are not doing, right? And then these two sets of approaches could be non-invasive, broadly classified as non-invasive and invasive. Of course, for many cases, non-invasive is the only way to go because the issues are not severe enough to invade the brain. And an example of it is this so-called high definition, high density EEG cap that you could build and you could learn a lot from the brain. And it has its own limitations, right? But it is non-invasive, and that is very attractive to many, many subjects. And then the bottom picture is an invasive methodology. But again, drilling a hole into the skull and then invasively record from the brain would give you a lot of information, which is very different format than the one with high definition EEG, but it tells you a lot more information, but is very, very invasive. And the question is, how can machine learning and AI help in sort of dealing with this signal, dealing with this data, and you help us understand diseases? That's one of the biggest challenges that we have. There is a chat here.
No, don't worry. You can continue.
Oh, that's not for me.
No.
All right. I lost my can you see my presentation again?
Perfect, yes.
Yeah. Basically, to understand diseases, which is incredibly important, as Harris talked about, the brain economy is suffering from a number of different diseases that we all face with, And then on top of that, just to understand, we would like to understand the underlying circuit of the brain. How do we learn? How do we memorize? And what does it mean to learn? What circuit of the brain is involved in that process? And I think, in my opinion, many of these questions can be answered by investigating and interfacing with the brain. Whether it is invasive or non-invasive would depend on a particular problem we face. Another side of this issue is the therapeutic side, basically trying to, as Harris said, to write into the brain, basically. I'm thinking about technologies that, again, either non-invasive or invasive, but they stimulate the brain. Our brain is an electrical circuit, and there are many studies that show that with stimulation, you could move the brain from unhealthy state to a healthy state. And there are prime examples of that. DBS is one technology that has been FDA approved for a few different disorders, including Parkinson's. And you can watch videos on YouTube, and these videos are fascinating. The patient's Parkinson and tremor goes away as soon as the stimulation starts. And the reality is that we really do not understand exactly why. We have some hypotheses in that space, but we really do not understand why. And the question is, can we develop technologies that are non-invasive, but yet effective? Basically, send some energies down deep inside the brain structure to basically focus on a very, very small area and stimulate that area and move it from an unhealthy state to a healthy state. That's a technology that needs to be developed. It's not there yet. And it is something, to me, is fascinating basically both the invasive part is fascinating and the non-invasive part is definitely fascinating, and it could be a solution for millions of patients and for several different neurological disorders. And all of these technologies that we have in mind in terms of their possible use for neurological disorders demand or heavily need machine learning. And the way you can think of it is that we record from the brain and we learn from what we recorded from and turn that into a signal, to stimulate that region of the brain. And then again, watch the brain and ask the patient to do an action, again, record, and then learn, and then control and all that. And this loop has been around in control theory for by now 100 years. And the problem with this particular control, which is referred to as data-driven closed loop control, is that we understand how to do this thing very well when the system that you're dealing with is a linear system. And when the system is nonlinear, like our brain, this methodology is much more complicated. We don't have a really good answer on how to do this properly. And that is an open research area, basically data-driven, closed-loop, real-time control of our brain. And that is something that we really do not have proven technology to get this thing done. And that, in my opinion, should be an open research problem. When you try to summarize everything that we have is that we need to look at the next generation of medical devices, in particular neurotechnology that interfaces with our brain, and the use of AI and the use of machine learning and all that is not to be argued. I mean, that is definitely a clear technology that we need to basically go from a huge set of data, millions of signals, hundreds of signals that we can collect from the brain, and then turn that collection of data into action. And the other aspect that needs to be worked on is how do we interface with the brain? How do we record from the brain? And what can we do in terms of developing new materials and new electronics to be able to grab the data, process the data, and do it all in a way that offers or subjects our brain to minimal damage. And that is a very sort of important research area that we should focus on, both developing new polymers and new gels that are conductive and can record from the brain, and also bioelectronics to process the data, millions of data points, millions of signals in a most energy efficient way, and extract the information that we need. With that, I'm going to end my discussion and thank you for inviting me.
Thank you very much, Behnam. This is very interesting. And I have just one question before going to the next speaker is, of course, you mentioned the importance of data and data collection. We know very well that these are very granular data that you're talking about.
Yes.
So how to collect it, how to manage it, and how to store it in a responsible and also ethical way, because we are talking about really individual people data. Of course, it's very important for the experimentations of those devices that you're mentioning. So how to deal with this process in a market which is not only emerging, but then at the same time, we don't know what would be, of course, some of the consequences of all this data. And if this data, for example, falls into certain, misuse or so on and so forth, how do you see this?
Well, I mean, that's a very good question. It's a very important problem. It's an important problem from a number of different perspectives. I think NIH as an organization has very, interesting and effective guidelines to help researchers like us to deal with the data, to store it properly and ethically. And I think in that sense, NIH, DOD, and a number of different organizations in the US at least have play a strong role in that. And I think clinicians and hospitals are very good at that, but at some aspect, maybe researchers are not so good at that. I think that's where the guidelines from NIH and DoD and NSF comes into play. This is a very, very serious issue, right? As you just said. And then I think we, as an organization, we must and we do follow these guidelines. And that's a very important point.
Thank you. Thank you very much for emphasizing it. Now I would like to invite our next panelist, Boniface Kahobewi. He is expert on early childhood development, and he is from the UNICEF. So Boniface, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Professor Ryan. Good to have this chance to also share thoughts from UNICEF. And also good to come after the three speakers who have, ably laid the foundation of the conversation. I'm not going to share slides, but as you know, UNICEF is more like closer to implementation. So colleagues have talked of what is happening on the background, technologies, being developed, what is happening in the lab. So in my submissions, you are going to see me speaking more closer to the communities, closer to what is happening in the countries, closer to what is happening in the life of children. And I'm going to focus on AI for the good of early child brain development. But for me to set the stage, I'm going to digest a bit, giving you a bit of what is happening in the landscape of early child development. Then I'll bring now the link between AI and early child development, and I'll end with some few recommendations. And just a refresher to remind ourselves, we are talking of early childhood, but it's a critical period, which is more like a window of opportunity, where interactions between young children and their environments have actually a greater impact in terms of influencing their physical, bit cognitive, bit emotional, bit social development. So it's that critical window whereby what happens or does not happen has a bearing in life or in adulthood. Within UNICEF, we position ECD not as a sector. And allow me to highlight that we view ECD, early child development, as an outcome. In other words, the thematic themes of health, education, child protection, and others contributing to the outcome. And in 2018, I don't know if colleagues are aware, but the World Bank, UNICEF, WHO developed what we call the nurturing care framework. And the nurturing care framework stipulated, 5, components of nurturing care, which are interrelated and at the same time indivisible. And these are: a child should have good health, adequate nutrition, safety and security, opportunities to early learning. And they are mentioning these because I'm going to come back to these when I speak. So I'm just trying to connect the dots so that, we have the proper narrative, in the next few minutes. As we know, also the Sustainable Development Goals embraced early child development as critical, in ending poverty, addressing inequalities, and ensuring that we also have a world that is prosperous and is also peaceful. At the same time, we know, again, some of you may be aware that investments in the early child development are the most, effective ways to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. So for the world to achieve the growth, we need the investment in the early years. But again, we have, some, good statistics. For example, for governments, the economic returns are as high as $13 for every dollar spent. So you see that, it's huge economic returns by investing, in early years. But despite all this, evidence, the importance, just to give you a snapshot of what is happening out there, 1 in 3 children aged, the age of 5 are not growing or developing well due to malnutrition. So malnutrition is a big issue, and children are not developing well because of that. At the same time, the 2030 Sustainable Development Goal says by 2030, all children should be developmentally on track. But 6 years down the line, we're already talking of only 1 in 3 children, 3 to 4 years, are developmentally on track. In other words, the challenge is with us. The time is now. We don't have time. Children are growing. We need to respond. Now, that's when I think AI comes into the equation. The neuroscience and whatever thing is happening out there comes into the equation to see what should we do, because we have a lot of children who are not, developing to their full potential. And allow me to put a note that within UNICEF, we are developing a framework to guide our application of AI. As such, some of the things that I'm going to mention may not be fully representative of the agency position because we are still doing that. And you heard Harris also talked of the UN advisory body that is working on AI. So the UN is responding. But as I indicated, some of the points that I'm going to mention may not be necessarily the position of the organization I represent. A newly released report this year, we normally have what we call the State of the World Children Report. So the 2024 report is out, and it has singled out 3 mega trends that are transforming the world. One is demographics, 2, climate and environmental crisis, and 3, frontier technologies. So frontier technologies has been singled as one of the 3 mega trends that are informing the world that we live. And the report is trying to project life in 2050. So look at a child who is born now. One, we need to prepare that child so that they can develop to their full potential. At the same time, how are they going to live in 2050? Technology is moving so fast. So the big question on the table is how can we best secure the future of children in 2050 so that they can survive, they could also thrive and meet their full potential. And this is where the neurotech and AI becomes handy. And that's why now I'm going to dive in line, with this conversation. So the report is saying we need to take advantage of the possibilities of frontier technologies like AI. So we need to capitalize on that. It's an opportunity. So we need to take advantage of that. And that's why I'm so excited with, what has been presented by the previous, speakers and what is happening out there. It's a huge, huge opportunity. Children need help, parents need support, families need support, and we need to take advantage of the frontier technologies before us. And again, we need to urgently bridge the digital divide and build children's digital skills. I get frightened because of the digital divide, which is out there because children are not living in the same environment. And the report is saying we need some agency to bridge that digital divide and also build the children digital skills, especially in societies where children are left behind in the digital revolution. So we have a revolution, but we cannot lump all children. Others are going to access, others are going to be left out, and the report is helping us to understand that. And we're also calling upon governments and businesses or institutions to also invest in technology that is designed to benefit children, but at the same time, safeguarding them and protect their best interests. So it's not just a matter of technology, it's not just a matter of science, but we also need to safeguard and protect, their best interests. And they are taking into account even the needs and the views of the children themselves. So children today, we cannot deny it, interacting with AI. And they will continue even in the next quarter of the century. So that's the life, that's the norm. So it's no longer a choice, but it's a matter of embracing, but not just embracing it, but responsibly to deliver, early child development programs effectively. So the landscape is changing so fast. That's why we need to embrace, move with time, but, do it responsibly and also bring the efficiencies so that, we can also reach out more children, but reach them well. So it's a new field, as colleagues have indicated, not fully researched, so we are learning, but we see AI offering, the opportunities to address many, many challenges which are there. You heard me mentioning of the components of nurturing care, be it in health, be it in nutrition, be it in child protection, all these, thematic areas. There are challenges that are more like, retarding the growth and development of young children. But some few studies are saying AI technologies integrated in education platforms such as play-based learning tools. As we know, children learn through play. So by integrating play-based learning tools, they were actually associated with improved cognitive development. So we know some things the research is telling us. So some improvements in cognitive development by fostering actually better creativity and critical thinking. So creativity, critical thinking in this new era, we need a generation that is more like advancing in these domains. And some studies are also showing enhanced psychological well-being and social participation, particularly for children with disabilities. So AI and other technologies can help to reach out to children who are living with disabilities. And again, some studies are showing AI-based tools enabled parents to effectively navigate their responsibilities. And we're talking of, for example, managing schedules, monitoring academic progress. So AI has that kind of potential to support parents. But we are being cautioned. We are getting feedback. So some of the things that we are hearing, people are giving feedback, is to not go the route of over-reliance on technology at the expense of human connections. So as AI becomes more integrated into early child development, our education programs, there's a huge risk that the educators, for example, the caregivers or the children, they might become over-reliant on technology. So you see educators, parents, caregivers, and the children themselves, being over-reliant on technology. And this over-reliance by these groups, for example, may lead to diminishing, interpersonal interactions or connections, and less emphasis on essential, social, emotional skills that are good for human, through human connection. So humanity is designed to interact. Parents are meant to socialize and interact with their children, but technology can come in between and break that. So we are getting feedback that, over-reliance on technology at the expense of human connections may not do us good. That's why in the topic we are talking of AI for the good of child development. So it's the good, not the other way. And again, we need to have meaningful child, caregiver interactions that are critical for child development and caregiver mental health and well-being. So by interacting with your own child, by socializing, you are also addressing or managing your own mental health and well-being. And that's why we don't want to go the other way, but to also mitigate that. The feedback is also saying, and even the report I mentioned, the 2024 report, World State of Children, talking of safeguarding child safety and equalities. We have a world which is full of inequalities, but technology should not come to promote that. So while the integration of AI into ECD holds immense potential, it also presents several significant challenges, and that must be addressed to ensure that AI should enhances, not the other way. So it should be enhancing rather than hindering the growth and learning of young children. And there are security and privacy concerns that need to be regulated to protect the children and their families. And there are also disparities I mentioned to access even the devices themselves, the gadgets, the divide is huge. And other communities, they may not have the reliable internet. And that is also going to fuel the inequalities in early child development. Because when I say the majority of children are not developing to their full potential, yes, it's more like one statistic, but when you deep down, you see that, some countries are more like lacking behind, and the technology should not come to leave them behind. So as such, there's need to develop or update inclusive policies and regulatory frameworks that are going to protect children against the risk of the emerging technologies. I'm going to give you like a feel of what exactly people are saying in the field, and these are young children. And we have what we call the U report. One quote is coming from a 16-year-old female, person, a girl from Romania. And she's saying, in 2050, artificial intelligence will redefine the world we live today. Please use it responsibly to create a fair, innovative, and sustainable society where technology serves the common good and does not create inequalities. And she's so passionate, she's saying, please use it responsibly. Create a fair, society, and don't create inequalities. And I also have a quote from a EU reporter, 22 years, from the United Republic of Tanzania. And he's saying, it is crucial for leaders to enact policies and regulations that ensure the ethical and the responsible use of AI and technology. This includes promoting transparency, accountability, fairness in the development and the deployment of AI systems. So promoting transparency, accountability, and fairness in the development and the deployment of AI systems. And I'll finish by a quote of, a EU reporter, 23 years, from Rwanda. And he's saying, we must ensure that AI development is guided by ethical principles. It is critical to mitigate risk, protect privacy, and prevent biases that will deepen societal divides. So the key message there is the protection, avoiding inequalities, but it's being worked excuse me, is being welcomed, but those are more like the red flags that are coming that we should not, more like, ignore. I'll finish by a few recommendations. One is we need more coordinated research to understand the impact of AI on child development, including the ECD programming itself. So research should be coordinated. And we also need to build some stronger strategic collaborations, including with the technology developers. It should not be an issue of them and us. Currently, the program and the developers are not talking much, but we need strategic collaborations. That is going to help us leverage resources and align the needs of the children and parents. Again, we should adopt and strengthen legislation and effective governance systems to protect children's rights. And lastly, focus on digital equality for every child. Let us not reinforce historic patterns of systematic bias and discrimination. In October, UNICEF and the Wharton Neuroscience Initiative at UPenn, University of Pennsylvania, we convened where we brought researchers, practitioners to discuss the future of brain capital by enhancing child development in the age of AI. So a white paper is being developed. Colleagues I'm sharing the panel with, Harris was with us and others. So look out for this white paper, but the conversation is, proceeding, and, thanks for inviting me to share the thoughts, as I indicated, closer to implementation and also bringing the realities of what we are hearing from the field. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Boniface, for this very comprehensive view. I think when we look at the early childhood development, the challenges are great in any transition. I think you put a focus on the digital divide. Yeah, this is the key element, which I don't know if I was muted or.
Yes, you are muted, I think, for some seconds.
Okay, yes, sorry, I was muted. So I was saying, Boniface, thank you very much for your comprehensive overview. It gave really a very good insight on the childhood development in those transitions. I think we need to understand also that you mentioned yourself that skills are essential. We need to develop further skills. We need to overcome the digital divide. Regions like, for example, Africa and Mediterranean and other parts of the world, they don't have the same digital infrastructure and development like developed countries. This might be analyzed and see what are the pros and cons for it. So practically, the work is huge in the years to come. The challenges are huge, and this is why I agree with you, we need to have some sort of centralized, but also bottom top approach, not only top down approach, because you see, the challenges are global, but the actions must be local. And I think this is also essential to ensure that the research are also transferred to all parts of the world, not only the part of the world that owns the technology. So this is still, of course, wishful thinking, as you know it very well, but probably need to push for further for it. So thank you very much for this great overview, Boniface. So our next speaker is looking at the investment and at the intersection of AI and neurotechnology. And this is Amy Cruz. She is a general partner and Chief Investment Officer of Satori Neuro Investment Fund. So please, Amy, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And thanks so much for the excellent comments of my colleagues today. I really appreciate the opportunity to share with you the, kind of the perspective from the investor landscape, which, certainly is probably overwhelmingly positive in general, but I myself am a neuroscientist and have had a kind of a long career in the development and deployment of advanced neurotechnologies. The fund itself focuses on mental health, brain health, and wellness, and as we've talked about today, human flourishing. So I just want to share very briefly some perspectives that I have. There's sort of beautifully framed by my colleague from the NIH, like sort of why now, right? And I think one of the reasons that we're having this conversation is that there's been a convergence of learnings from both, investment from companies, non-dilutive investments, investments from governments, and why has all this come together? And so I sort of sum those up in these three principles: from synapses to systems thinking, neurotech catches up with Moore's law, and all roads lead to neuroplasticity. And you will hear repeated themes that others have mentioned today. When I was a graduate student in neuroscience, neuroscience itself was a very bottom-up type of discipline. And I think over the last 5 years, again, inspired and enhanced by all of the research and energy and resources that have gone into this space, we've really started to understand the brain from a systems level perspective. This has certainly been, I would say, enhanced by big data, but we have yet to actually see the full force of how AI can come in and influence this space. But we now know that a lot of things, a lot of mental health conditions that we once considered to be sort of monolithic, like depression or anxiety, are actually quite heterogeneous and have biotypes and phenotypes associated with them. This will have a big impact on how neuroscience will be implemented. And, very interestingly, I think AI will have a big role in how this is further developed and used in applications. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. You would be surprised, given that how neuroscience has influenced the development of machine learning and AI, that neuroscience itself, I think, has been slow to develop or slow to implement a lot of the AI learnings and technologies, but that is now radically changing, right? So this is why I call it neurotech catches up with Moore's law. The compute that we have on our phones, the ability to do large data processing, the signal processing that was talked about earlier, this is really now deeply, deeply impacted how we're looking at brain-computer interfaces, both invasive and non-invasive. The signal processing that's available to us is quite impressive. And so we've seen the things like decoding of speech, decoding of thoughts, decoding of imagined handwriting from implanted devices that have allowed people, with ALS and other motor disorders to actually communicate. I think this is a big development, and will continue to be something that we see. As was mentioned by my colleague at Rice, the non-invasive neurostimulation technologies using electricity, magnets, low intensity focused ultrasound. These have enormous implications for how we modulate the brain, and is one of the most exciting areas of development that we are looking at right now from an investing perspective. This, while I would say initially developed in the context of going in and modulating very specific parts of the brain, is definitely going to be enhanced by the implementation of AI and connectomics, or the ability to understand what parts of the brain are connected to one another and what builds up these networks. And so this is, these sort of three things taken together really, sort of influence what I call the overall innovation ecosystem. So this is my view of the investing world, thinking about therapeutics, devices, diagnostics, and precision measurement, and then the infrastructure and access to care. I think, as we have discussed, mental health is certainly one of the most pressing needs that we have, but neurodegenerative disorders, cognition, even human performance are all deeply and intimately tied together because of the nature of the brain itself and how all of those systems interact. And so as an investor, this is sort of my lens onto the world and how I think about it. As Harris has so beautifully covered in his commentary around the brain economy, this is an immense opportunity. As an investor, of course, I look at things not just in the context of how they can, of course, enhance human flourishing, but also, really building up a strong investing economy and economy in general around these tools. I think one of the most exciting areas, as Harris mentioned, is around the brain-computer interface space. I think we're really finally starting to see the understanding of the breadth and depth of that space. But mental disorders, the diagnostics that we've talked about are each massive areas in this, in this space. I like to this is my summary slide for the investing theme. So one of the most, one of the biggest privileges of being an investor is for what we call the flow, the opportunity flow, the companies that we see coming across the landscape. And so in the context of this conversation, I'm framing it because almost all of these areas, maybe there's one or two that won't benefit or won't be enhanced by the influence of AI, right? And so I think as we move forward, particularly in the neurotechnology investing area, it is not if AI will be implemented in these particular domains, but how it will be implemented and to what degree and to what depth, right? And so particularly as we see what's happening in brain-computer interfaces, invasive and non-invasive, what does AI allow us to do? It allows us to take data sets, sparse data sets, big training data sets, and actually, develop, sort of inferences based on those. We're already seeing that in the decoding space, but I think it's going to deeply, deeply impact connectomics and precision neuroscience and precision psychiatry. I am, it's sort of one of those days when you're like, hey, what have I seen? A number of companies approaching us around foundational models of the brain. What will that allow us to do? Will we be able to develop, digital twins of ourselves and our brains and actually understand how we and our systems adapt to insult, injury, or even potential enhancement? And so I like to end all of my talks with sort of bold predictions. I'm not going to talk through these, but as an investor, I have a 5-year, 10-year horizon, right? And so as we think about what systems can do today, it's really important to think about where we might be in 10 years and then work backwards with all of these, discussions and frameworks that we're talking about. How do we want to shape this future? So invasive brain-computer interfaces right now, not even, FDA approved for use in clinical systems. It's my prediction that in 10 years, they will become the standard of care, right, for the replacement of motor function in ALS and other degrees. But we may enter a situation where people are actually using those off-label as we talk about for their own brain enhancement. We'll see what happens there. Sleep augmentation is one of the most popular and interesting areas in terms of the use of neurotechnology. We're at the cusp of having closed loop neurotechnology systems that individuals can wear during sleep and actually modulate their sleep. I think within 10 years, I think we'll be designing the sleep that we want and have at the end of each night. I've already talked about precision psychiatry, which is one of the areas that I'm most excited about. As my colleague from UNICEF talked about, we have a looming challenge in front of us around children's mental health. I think we're living in a world where, yes, some of that work right now is focused on adults, but eventually we will have the screening tools that we need to help children and individuals who may have had more challenging environments thrive and flourish in the future and really reduce the stigma around mental health long term. And then finally, I think many things that we all are very concerned around neurodegenerative disorders. We are really at the cusp of having biomarkers that will allow us to move much further upstream around neurodegeneration and eventually prevent the development of those disorders in, middle-aged adults. Obviously, right now, we're very much focused on individuals who are already presenting with symptoms, but I think we're using the tools and techniques that we've talked about. We'll be able to move much further upstream. And so just a few little, things to throw out there in terms of, where I think we're headed. It is such a pleasure, to be with my colleagues today, because I think you hopefully have seen this really big picture and many angles. I think we're at the cusp of how, AI and neuroscience and the brain and mental health are blossoming. And it is really, really important to stay engaged and, I would say involved in this important conversation.
Thank you, Amy. It's fascinating. You mentioned that you are really developing this very innovative investment approach. And of course, these are sectors that are emerging, very new, and the risk is very high, right? So
Yeah.
it's not an easy segment in the investment, I would say. I mean, of course, it's completely new, and better
Yes.
that the rate of return could be. I don't know. So my question to you, and please feel free not to respond. What is the average rate of return, and how do you see this, of course, imperatives of the financial markets to maximize the rate of return on certain investments? Say responding also to the other imperatives, which is enhancing overall prosperity of our societies, which are sometimes not 100% aligned necessarily with the financial imperatives. So okay, take it like this. So
I appreciate the questions, though, for sure.
Yes. So what do you think?
So I guess, I'll say something a little bit more general, and then we can always, dive into something a little deeper. But I think there is now a deep understanding of the size of these markets and the size of the potential markets. And so while we haven't, I can't give you an average rate of return yet, I think we are really starting to see the interest of, some of the larger entities that really can, I call it move the needle, right? In terms of these outcomes. So what's happening in mental health, psychiatry, neurodegenerative disorders, I think we're really starting to see the market pay attention to those. There is a transition that has to happen from early stage investment to later stage investment. And I think we're in the process of that now. I don't have, other than a couple of, I would say, things that have happened in the pharmaceutical industry, a couple of examples in neurotechnology. We don't have some of the big exits yet that will, allow me to make some of those calculations, but I think they're well underway. So I think, we're in process. We have our eyes on some of these big outcomes. I think we'll see them first in psychiatry and mental health, and then we'll eventually start to see more in the neurodegenerative and neurotechnology space as well. So.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Amy. Now we go to the discussion. As you know, our webinar is live streamed, so I ask my colleagues if there are any questions from the audience on the live stream, or also the ones who have been connected to attend this webinar. But I have already prepared a couple of questions. And my first one is, of course, you alluded to new technologies and the convergence between the AI and neurotechnology. These are mainly in the very advanced world, practically. So how do you see your work and your research and, of course, investments and policies in the, I would say, the interaction between the global South versus the global North? We know very much, Boniface has already mentioned this in his speech. There is a divide, digital divide, that is clear. We are heading into further inequalities, not in terms of digital, not in terms of technology, in terms of neurotechnology, in terms of AI, because of the basis is also the AI infrastructure. So how do you see this? How do you see your work really not increasing the gap between the global South and the global North? And this is essential now to have this equity and this just transition. We talk about just transition on the clean energy, but also we need to also think about just transition in the digital and all neurotechnology and so on. On this question, I would like to start with John.
Yeah, it's great set of questions. One of the big challenges that we face is how to disseminate and democratize these technologies. The one thing about data is I think right now, many of the resources that we've been developing, either funded through NIH federal funding or funded by large organizations, has been pretty much by default the province of the highly resourced institutions at the highly resourced countries. I think standing up big data is actually, it seems maybe perhaps paradoxical if we just give it at first blush, but thinking about it more deeply, I think the ability or the drive to make big data accessible, findable, accessible, interoperable, reusable is actually perhaps a way of democratizing some of these resources. So I think that's one path. Standing up international collaborations, as I think everybody here can probably appreciate, it sounds great on paper. It's certainly, I think, an aspirational goal, but very, very difficult to accomplish. But if we can find a way to truly share data, this is really, I think, will be the legacy of all big science projects. Then and on our efforts, this is, I think, one path toward better dissemination and true democratization. But it also requires, especially when dealing with human data, that the data do represent all humans on the planet, not just from specific origins or ancestral backgrounds. But this is the challenge that we're facing. Our goal, certainly at the NIH, is to democratize the resources that we develop, but it's going to take a global village to do that.
Thank you, John. So democratize technologies and access of data. This is so important to make all data available, also free. And this also, at least certain data cannot be free, but I think it's important to have free accessible data, at least for assessing, the trends. Behnam?
Let me mute first. As John said, data is collected over the last several years and is based in principle readily available. And I think that would be, the data that would feed the engine of AI. And I think as an academician, everything we do, we publish, and that is readily available. And I think but in terms of technology meaning bioelectronics or electrodes and these sort of really advanced electrodes, those are technologies that definitely continue to enhance or to increase the digital divide, right? And I think there's as a technologist or as an engineer, it's hard to imagine that could be decreased, that divide could be decreased. That's a very sort of challenge that we all face. I think when you look at devices that Apple and many other companies are producing, they call it digital health devices, they're very expensive. I mean, they're readily available, but they're incredibly expensive. That is not available, not reachable to many, many countries. Therefore, it is basically keeps adding to the digital divide. And I think as an engineer, there's not much we can do, but investors, I'm putting this thing on Amy again, investors and other players may be able to play a much bigger role in that space.
Harris, what do you think?
I definitely agree that it has a potential to widen inequality in society if you're getting access to high quality neurotechnology and AI models in the richer world and not access in the poorer world. But maybe two examples that cut back against this of showcasing leadership in the global South. Maybe three examples actually. The first is that Chile has arguably the world's most advanced neuro rights legislation, protecting the cognitive liberty of Chileans. So this is like an anticipatory piece of legislation, but it actually has real, neuro rights are key and sacred human rights to Chileans, and therefore the way that digital companies, AI companies, neurotechnology companies operate in that nation state must be done in accordance with neuro rights and enhancing cognitive liberty and protecting cognitive liberty. So that's great. The second thing is that I think we see groups like the Latin American Brain Health Institute, RIM, out of Santiago, Chile, like Agustin Ibanez specifically, working with very large multimodal data sets of brain-related data to develop novel ways. And so he's basically using advanced multimodal brain data sets. He's using advanced AI to figure out very impressive ways of understanding the brain states of very diverse populations in Latin America, and now actually expanding across the global South. So that's really pioneering big data work led by Latin America. And then finally is the Yaoundé Declaration on the Brain Economy, to see the president of Cameroon endorse the brain economy from a smaller West African nation, and to advance the brain economy work at the global stage through the UN General Assembly is wonderful. And they're more advanced in this thinking than anyone else, and working with ministers across government. So that's great leadership. And perhaps I need to circle back, and we need to have discussions with the Cameroonians about integrating AI and neurotechnology into that declaration.
Thank you, Harris, for these 3 points. And I'm very happy to say that on Friday, we invited Agustin Ibanez to give the guest lecture at our conference, and to connect the research on neuroscience to AI and nanotechnology. So it was very, very nice to have also the Latin American brain community coming to Barcelona, and really that we can learn also from that space into the Mediterranean and Africa. Amy, on the investment side.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the comments and questions so far. And I think there's two good pieces of good news. One is that I think neuroscience and neurotechnology itself is a very global very global activity. If you look at the Society for Neuroscience and sort of the activity that happens across the globe in neurotech, I would say it's one of the advantages that we have. So anything that continues to foster and enhance that, I think is beneficial. From the investing side, I actually think investors have a critical role in ensuring that we have great representation from diverse populations. We're paying attention to the potential of international investment and development. There's clearly a deep interest in brain-computer interfaces and what's happening in neurotechnology, and so I think fostering that as an investor is really key. And I think that again looking at the numbers, right? All of the companies that we're working with are paying attention to what a rollout across the global landscape, looks like. Certainly, obviously, there's a little bit of a bias and interest towards deploying things in the U.S. first, but I think that's in part driven by FDA approvals and other things that happen, that sort of signal those things. But every single company that I'm talking to is talking about international rollouts and what that looks like. And so I think that's a great sign. But I think, as I said before, investors have a key role in ensuring and not don't want to say enforcing, because we don't get to do that, but really enhancing that piece.
I see John hands up.
Yeah, I just I wanted to make a comment about a point that Harris raised about neural rights, cognitive liberty. Certainly critical issues we do need to bear in mind, as I mentioned earlier on, the ethical, legal, societal impacts of what we do from the very, very beginning. One concern, of course, with any kind of regulation, as much as I think it is needed at some level, is how to thread the needle so that we protect humans and all of their human rights, balanced with the necessity to innovate. And these two things, I think, naturally are at tension. They don't have to be in conflict, though, but they are in tension with each other. There have been a number of efforts springing up across the world, but also within the very diverse United States of America. There are 50 states, each with their own governments. My concern in terms of stifling innovation is that if we have a collection of laws governing how we collect and use the data, that may pose a barrier to being able to share data, not just across the world, but I'm concerned about being able to share data among scientists in the 50 United States. So it's just something to keep in mind. I think the need is real, the intent is good, but we need to be very careful about unintended consequences about how we actualize meeting these needs.
Thank you, John. So you heard all of this, Boniface. What do you think? You raised this point of the divide.
Yes, hearing Harris speaking, Amy speaking, and the colleagues also coming, I think I can sum it as we need more of co-creation and working together. Because in practice, they are more like the other side developing technology and looking at the other side as more like recipients. And that's where maybe history tells us that we have missed it. So like the Cameroon Yaoundé example by Harris, I see that as more like co-creation so that the ideas, the feedback are fully embedded from the onset. The other example Harris gave, I see that as more like ensuring that the legal systems are ready to do that. And legal systems take time to change. So the area, the better to engage the government so that they can also more like start embracing it. And I think that is going to help a lot. Number two, it's also more like us realizing that it's not necessarily that technology or the gadgets to be in the hands of the people who are not having like minimum resources, for example. But how can we ensure that the technology improves the delivery of services? So you heard me mentioning of health, nutrition, child protection. Technologies, AI can actually help us to ensure that the national systems are delivering better. So bringing in efficiencies, be it resource use, be it data management, that is more of delivery. Because the workforce out there is more like overloaded. If you look at a frontline worker in health, in a community, in a country in sub-Saharan Africa, they have a lot to do. But technology is meant to simplify the workflow, the processes. So in addition to technology not being available to the child, to the household, but how can we use the national systems to ensure that they deliver better? So in addition to co-creation, I also look at bringing now the efficiencies in terms of simplified processes, data being available timely, and that kind of narrative is going to help a lot. So I think it's unpacking what we mean by the divide. Some divides are specific to individuals, but some divides we still have relatively systems which can deliver. All we need is to improve those national systems. So I think those 2 points for now, I think can help. And before I forget, even as we develop technology, how much do we involve the institutions of higher learning, for example, in sub-Saharan Africa, using the example we are giving, So I think that kind of, partnership, intentional partnerships, so that we also listen, get inputs, and as we sit in New York and working with them, it's going to help us a lot. So I think that's kind of something that we also need to embrace. Thank you.
Thank you, Boniface. I see the time running, and I know that John has to go. I have one pressing question, which is the trade-offs between innovation, ethics, and regulation. You all alluded to it, but we did not elaborate. So I want to start with John before he leaves. What are the main issues there?
Yeah, so we could look at it as trade-offs, but we could also look at this as an opportunity to do it right. Yeah, so I would argue that just blindly, well, I think I'll just pose this as an extreme and maybe somewhat ridiculous argument. I mean, just developing technology without regard to the impacts and the needs, whatever, is not. I mean, one could do it, but it really would be of low value. I mean, beyond any ethical concern. So I think this really is an opportunity to look at these issues not in conflict but in tension, and to actually drive better innovation. It would be difficult. It's arguably more difficult, more complex to design these new technologies, whether it's hardware or AI, in a way that takes into account the issues that I think all of us here are concerned about. But it also can drive innovation to make better products that will serve humans better. So we just have to see as we go. We encounter specific examples in the work that we fund. We find issues that we hadn't, frankly, fully appreciated because they arose as emerging concepts, but they do help us do the work better and with more intention. And I think this is an attitude that we should adopt to drive the innovation, to make it more useful. Ultimately, if we develop tools that aren't deployed widely, then we have not really met our mission. And I think that's our North Star and for what we do.
Thank you, John. I look at Behnan.
I cannot agree with John more. I think we are very used to FDA as a US organization that basically puts out a number of different regulations that, as John said, they actually could help us they put devices together that follow these instructions, follow these regulations, and it is basically adds to the regulation. It may delay things a bit, but it is extremely important to follow those. I think when you talk about ethics, I think that in a way you can think of it as a no-brainer. Of course, none of us want to do research that is unethical. That's not a good thing. But again, we are used to this. We got to keep that in mind, not in the back of our mind, but at the forefront of our innovation, right? Ethical issues, FDA regulation, they're all, you could view it as issues that inhibits innovation, or you can think of it as things that you have to do. That's it.
Here, Boniface.
Yeah, great. It may appear as a repetition, but for me, the key question is regulations, yes, but the reinforcement itself. So I think as we are looking at developing the frameworks, the instruments, in reality, there are many, many regulations in other fields we have seen, but the enforcement to ensure that people adhere to that. And I know it's a business space also where profit is involved, and the dynamics also change. So I think my comment, Ryan, if you ask me, it's beyond development of policies and regulations, but to ensure that they are really implemented and enforced. I think that's critical for me. Thank you.
Very important enforcement, yes. Amy?
Yes, so as John was sharing, it reminded me of an example that we have in the implanted brain-computer interface world, which is the collaborative community that's come together. And so we have not only the companies that are in this space, we have the regulatory bodies in this space, we have individuals with lived experience in this space, we have caregivers, the community at large, the individuals who will be responsible for approving and reimbursing these devices. And I think that was a movement right within the implanted BCI community to come together and address these questions together for both the good of the field as well as the good of individual companies that are developing in that space and hoping to come to market. And so I think that there is a big opportunity for communities like that to come together in these spaces. It's been a very productive conversation. And let me tell you, as an investor, hearing from individuals with lived experience, hearing from caregivers, hearing from families has enormously impacted the way that I think about investments and think about the companies that I invest in. And so I think, we are part of that conversation. And I think seeing those develop around specific implementation areas, I think is a great framework and something that's been developed that I'm very, very excited about in this space.
Harris, the last word is yours.
All right. Well, I think it's great that we're talking about this tension that John exposed between scale, commercialization, innovation, and regulation. It's good we're talking about it now because you think about social media, for example, that now we're seeing as that's the cat's out of the bag, as it were. We're seeing intensive regulations happening in different parts of the world. As example, the banning of social media for people under the age of 16 in Australia. So we want to try to avoid that situation where something breaks loose and then we have these sort of reactive and very crude approaches to regulating in the future. So it's good we're talking about it, and I'm reminded of looking back at we can all agree responsible innovation makes sense. We need innovation, but it needs to be responsible. So there are frameworks for responsible innovation that I think, Rim, we need to integrate into the brain economy model. I think you look at risk anticipation. Well, we've already exposed some anticipatory risks, risk detection, risk surveillance, and risk mitigation. And then we've filled out a bunch of other types of principles today. So we are coming at some kind of framework here at the end of the session today.
Thank you, Harris, for mentioning the responsible innovation framework. With our colleague at EMEA, we've been working on those since many years. In fact, to develop the transparent, responsible, inclusive, and sustainable development model. And we got inspired, in fact, by the responsible innovation principles of the European Union. So there are those principles, so we don't need to reinvent the wheel. And I think we just need to apply those to where could be applied in the case of the brain economy. I would like to thank you all so much for this really very fascinating discussion. It brings completely new areas of thinking, of research, of policy. And of course, we need to think a lot how to make all of this optimal. So thank you, John, Behnam, Boniface, Amy, and Harris. Thank you a lot for this nice discussion. And then for sure, we will meet again because this is not over. I mean, this is the beginning of the journey. And I just want to make a quick announcement. Our conference, of course, will continue for tomorrow. We have our first session at 2 o'clock European time. And then you are all welcome to join if you are interested. So please let us know if you have the time. Anyway, the main sessions will be recorded. So we have it hybrid to ensure that the people who have the time, they can join us or they can watch it online. So thank you very much and wish you all the best.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.